Manassas National Battlefield Park in Virginia draws about 600,000 visitors a year. People like 7-year-old Jackson Crow, who had read about the war.
I'm like, I like the Civil War. Maybe I should learn more about it.
The battlefield is a good place to do that in more ways than one, says Ed Clark, the park superintendent.
You can actually stand out here on the fields, see what they saw. But I think there's also an emotional connection that can be made on battlefields. This is the place where Americans fought. This is the place where Americans died.
Well over 500,000 Americans died during the 4-year war, the equivalent of losing 2% of the population, says Ray Brown, chief of interpretation for the battlefield.
You can imagine the impact this would have on whole communities throughout the country, and why there'd be such passions that have been passed on generation to generation, even at the remove of 150 years.
On this day at the battlefield, there is little evidence of that passion, but there is a desire to connect to the past. Marianne Lee brought her children here for a history lesson.
We separated, and yet we managed to come back together, and I think that's something important to see today, that there can be rebirth after a war like that.
Yale historian David Blight is one of the leading experts on the Civil War.
If you want to reconstruct a country after a horrible civil war, one way you can try to do it is by finding the mutuality of sacrifice between the two sides.
That's what had happened by the 50th anniversary of the war, when some 50,000 veterans from both sides assembled in Gettysburg, the site of the war's bloodiest battle. It was, Blight says, a celebration.
What we did in this country is we suppressed having to talk about what caused that war or what its results and legacies were by focusing largely on honoring the soldier.
Blight has written extensively on the war.
This time, we need to put the story of emancipation at the heart, at the center of this narrative, of this story. Because what really transformed the United States were not those battles. What really transformed the United States was the process by which 4 million slaves were freed and necessitated a kind of recrafting of our Constitution.
I have a dream.
But it would take the civil rights movement 100 years later to force the government to deliver on the promise of equality that became part of the U.S. Constitution following the war. Today, with an African American in the White House, we've come a long way, but the legacies of the war are still being debated.
God bless America.
But every time Americans debate the problem of states' rights, the relationship of federal power to state power, which we are indeed having a roiling debate over again, and every time we debate not only race relations, but the very idea of what it means to be an American in a multiracial, greatly diverse society, we are debating the direct legacies of the Civil War.
Here at Manassas Battlefield, and at dozens of other historic sites across the nation, this 150th anniversary of the war will address some of those issues.
We certainly have a mind for commemoration and really realizing its role in America's history with civil rights, with the causes of the Civil War. And I think the American public is much more ready for those kinds of conversations.
With 4 years of events ahead, there will be plenty of opportunities to discuss the legacies and lessons of the Civil War. Susan Logue, VOA News, Manassas, Virginia.